We want to bring in right now Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Tom Ricks. He's the author of the forthcoming book entitled Waging a Good War, a military history of the civil rights movement, 1954 to 1968. We look forward to talking with Tom about that in a few weeks when the book comes out. But, Joe, you mentioned the January 6th rioters. And this morning, Tom, we're looking at your new column for the Washington Post entitled Why I've Stopped Fearing America is Headed for a Civil War. And in it, you write in part, quote, the main things that give me hope arise from former President Donald Trump's attack on the electoral process, culminating in the January 6th assault on the Capitol. At the time, I feared that the unprecedented insurrection was the beginning of a sustained war on American democracy. Yet nothing much happened, rather. With the executive branch crippled and the legislative branch divided, the judicial branch of the federal government held the line. It was as if the American system had been subjected to a stress test and, albeit a bit wobbly, passed. Yes, we still have a long way to go. There are no signs of a national reconciliation in the offing. Some Trump followers, no doubt, will be elected to Congress and to state offices this fall, and control of both houses of Congress is uncertain. But it is beginning to feel to me like the wave of hard right, not conservative, reaction has crested.
So, Tom, I go back to first principles, which, of course, you began writing soon after Donald Trump was elected. And it seems, going back to that book, that all of those hours, all of those days, all of those years that James Madison read the classics to try to figure out what type of government to form that could withstand the test of time actually was time well spent for really the creator of Madisonian democracy. This system held perhaps by the barest of margins, but the federal judiciary with, as I've said time and again, with Federalist Society appointed judges often handing down the decisions, the system held.
It did. It was a shock to the system. And I was worried that this was the January 6th was the beginning of a series of attacks. But instead, the attacks didn't happen, and the judges upheld the law. Judges like rule of law. Even if they're hard right, they generally, not always, will say, no, the law is the law. You must respect legal authorities here. And that's kind of what happened. The system held. It wobbled a bit. Eventually, the legislative branch began to wake up, and the Americans looked and said, we really don't like political violence, left or right. And they said, we're getting sick of these antics. I think you're seeing a lot of concern among Americans these days that democracy is under attack, and they don't like it.
Yeah, Eddie, we have seen certainly over the past month or so, independent voters especially, across the Midwest, across the very region that Donald Trump needed to ride to victory in the Electoral College in 2016, independents, swing voters now turning against Trump, turning against Republicans in one poll after another.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, we see it, and we know there's a period of time between now and the midterms. We have to wait, of course. The political winds change rather quickly in this country. But I really want to ask Tom this question because I'm thinking about Buffalo. I'm thinking about the senseless murder justified by or motivated by the Great Replacement language. I'm thinking about the underlying causes, this general sense that there's a cultural and demographic threat that drives much of what we've seen. Of course, there's the kind of political realities that you've just laid out, the electoral considerations. But what about this the cultural engine, these underlying contradictions that seem to be driving the intensity of the current political landscape, Tom? What do you make of that? I understand your optimism here, but that hasn't been resolved, it seems to me.
Well, I defer to your works, which I've read and admired. I think that there is a 20% of America that basically is white nationalist. that in recent years felt permission to act out on that and were given permission by the president and the Republican Party. I think the large bulk of Americans don't like white nationalism, especially violent white nationalism, and they are reacting to it now and saying enough is enough. You people go back under your rock.
So, Tom, while I agree with your assessment about the lessening danger of a civil war among Americans, there is a view, a feeling that there is a virus out there, an infection caused by specifically largely one person over the last 5 or 6 years. That person is no longer in office. And the people who are most susceptible to catching one of the permutations of this virus are Americans who have suffered some sort of sense of loss over the past 10 or 15 years, whether it's the loss of a child in war, the loss of a home due to the economic collapse. They've suffered a sense of loss and still live with it. And they are the most susceptible to this virus of whether you call it white nationalism or people who just don't believe in government and want to overthrow any existing form of government. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think the sense that, especially for older white men, that they can no longer define American society on their own terms, deeply antagonizes some people. Yet, I think when that leads to violence, it is so off-putting to the majority of Americans that it's a losing position. Those people will be there. America has become a deeply unequal society, and a lot of people are getting screwed economically. And that driver will continue to be there. But when it turns to violence, I think that's a deal breaker for most Americans.
So Tom, though, let's be very clear. This isn't Germany in 1931, 1932. People aren't going around, Tom, with wheelbarrows of cash to buy some bread. We have unemployment at record lows. We've had record job growth over the past year and a half. You've got family restaurants that are only half open because they can't get people to come work for them. You've got you've got service industry people, entrepreneurs, small business owners, all suffering economically because they could hire more people, and people are just choosing not to work. So I've just got to say,
I totally disagree with that. People are choosing not to be paid these lousy wages. If you offered them $25 or $35 an hour, people would come out and work. The billionaires are holding on to too much cash in American society. They are not allowing the wealth to be spread, and they've, I think, bought the political system. I think we live in an oligarchy now that is not allowing wealth to spread across society. If billionaires paid their fair share of taxes, we'd have a very different society.
Well, we agree on that point, but I disagree with you that a family hardware store in Maine can pay $35 an hour to somebody working in their store. I disagree that a family restaurant that can't stay open, even in high season in Maine, from Maine to Florida, can't pay $35 for workers to keep their restaurant all the way open. So I'm just saying we have record low unemployment. So, and I agree with you that we are in large part an oligarchy. I talked about it yesterday. That billionaires and multinational corporations are getting a free ride. At the same time, our current economic status as a country, I don't think justifies the deep social unrest that we're seeing. I think that may come from things such as demographic changes in America.
Well, a good chunk of America, though, is being left behind by this thriving economy. That's a real problem. We are not doing a lot for the bottom half of the society in economic terms. We could do a lot more. We really stand out like a sore thumb among industrialized countries in the way we have a for-profit medical system, in the way we burden university students with debt. That is not the way the European societies run. My son lives in Barcelona. When he walks out of his door and looks, he doesn't see a single person worried about retirement, worried about health care, or worried about a college education, because those are things that the state takes care of for people.
Yeah, well, obviously
Ricks.
not our system, but that's something that you and Addie can debate against me and somebody else on another day. And we look forward to,
I look forward to
talk.
Yeah, we'll have to have
we
him
certainly
back.
look forward to having you back in a few weeks to talk about your new book, Waging a Good War.
Perfect
Very
timing.
excited about that.
Thank you very much, Tom Ricks, for being on this morning. And